the architecture of habit. Beneath the surface of every human life, there runs a silent machinery. Not seen, not heard, yet ever moving us. We call it habit. It is the invisible architecture of our days. While we imagine our choices spring from sudden will, John Dewey reminds us that what we call choice is most often the well-rehearsed echo of 1,000 yesterdays. In Human Nature and Conduct, Dewey stripped away the romantic illusion that human action emerges from a free-floating self, detached from the world. Instead, he revealed that the self is constructed by conduct, and conduct itself is rooted in the patterned energy of habits. Habits are not mindless routines. They are embodied intelligence. They shape how we see, what we desire, what we fear, and what even becomes visible to our minds as possible. Habits as the hidden logic of behavior. Imagine you are walking home. Your feet find the path without thought. Your eyes scan without conscious choice, and your body adjusts fluidly to each step. No deliberation is needed, because the habit has already decided. Dewey saw this as more than convenience. It is the primary law of human behavior. If we had to consciously calculate each act, existence would collapse under its own weight. Habits are the mind's way of storing solutions, compressing complex responses into graceful automatisms. They become the silent grammar of conduct. And yet, their power is double-edged. For while habits make life possible, they also make us predictable, mechanical, and blind. When left unexamined, what we call personality is largely the choreography of these hidden rhythms. Habits are not chains, they are tools. There is a common error, Dewey warns, to think of habits as rigid prisons, unchangeable grooves carved once and for all. But habits are living patterns, plastic and responsive to their environment. They can be reshaped, redirected, repurposed. Consider a musician who has trained her hands for years. Her fingers move seemingly of their own accord, not because they are trapped by habit, but because habit has become her servant. So too with the soul. The goal is not to destroy habits, but to train them as instruments of intention. Every action we repeat etches a subtle path in our nervous system, a trail the mind will later walk with less effort. If we do not choose these trails consciously, we become their captives. But if we choose them wisely, they become the scaffolding of our freedom. How habits shape perception and desire. Perhaps the most radical insight of Dewey is that habits do not merely govern what we do. They govern what we even notice or want. Our perception is filtered through our habits. The soldier sees terrain. The artist sees light. The merchant sees opportunity. The child sees adventure. The world is the same. But habit has taught each mind what to look for. And so desire itself is not born from the ether. It too is shaped by the grooves of habit. We desire what our habits have trained us to find rewarding. We fear what they have associated with pain. Our so-called free will is often nothing more than a well-rehearsed reflex wrapped in the language of choice. Habits and the making of character. When habits persist long enough, they crystallize into what we call character. This, Dewey says, is the great misunderstanding. We think of character as a static trait, as if a person simply is honest or cruel or kind. But character is not an essence. It is the cumulative sediment of conduct. Each act becomes a brick. Each brick becomes a wall. Each wall becomes the house where our future choices will live. The self is not a core hidden within us. It is the pattern that emerges from our ongoing behavior. This is why change feels so hard. To change the self, we must rebuild the pattern that has quietly constructed our days. The social soil of habit. No habit is born in isolation. They are seeded by environment, fertilized by culture, and pruned by social rewards and punishments. We imitate, absorb, and adapt to the rhythms of the world around us. Even our most personal habits carry the fingerprints of our surroundings. Dewey warns, if we ignore the social roots of habit, we risk blaming individuals for the products of environments they did not choose. To reform a person, you must also reform the conditions that continually sculpt their conduct. And so, change the environment, and the soul begins to grow in a new direction. Becoming conscious of the invisible. Most people live as if habits were air, ever present, yet unseen. But Dewey's gift is the revelation that we can make habits conscious. We can pause and ask, what pattern is moving me right now? Where did it come from? Does it serve the person I want to become? This moment of awareness is the opening through which freedom enters. Because only when we see the mechanism can we choose to rewire it. We are not static beings drifting through time. We are living networks of habits, shifting, forming, dissolving, reforming. To guide our conduct, we must first see the architecture beneath it, the silent loops that shape our days. Habits are not the enemy. They are the foundation stones, from which a conscious life can be built. The key is not to fight them, but to choose them. And in that choice, our future selves are born. The birth of thought from conflict. There is a stillness that lives in habit. When life flows smoothly, we act almost without knowing it, each gesture sliding into the next like water. But then, something interrupts. The familiar path collapses. The next step is unclear. The currents of our habits falter and swirl. And in that trembling pause, thought is born. Thought begins where habit breaks. John Dewey writes that thought does not emerge from serenity, but from obstruction. We do not think because we are curious angels floating in abstraction. We think because we are interrupted creatures, suddenly unsure how to act. Where habit suffices, no thinking is required. But where habit fails, thinking becomes our bridge over uncertainty. This is the paradox of human intelligence. It awakens not in the flow but in the fracture. It is the mind's emergency flare, lit when instinct falters, when desire collides with resistance, when the automatic machinery of life breaks down. The problem as the seed of thought. Dewey calls this moment of breakdown a problematic situation. It is not merely confusion, it is the birth of inquiry. The mind begins to search. It maps the terrain, gathers clues, traces possible paths forward. We often think of thinking as an abstract pastime, but in truth it is instrumental, a tool forged to restore the lost continuity of action. We think because we want to move again. Thought is not an escape from action. It is action's inner workshop, the role of imagination. In this workshop of the mind, another power quietly awakens, imagination. Imagination is not fantasy. It is the rehearsal of possible futures. When habit breaks, the mind begins to simulate new patterns, to see which might restore harmony. Dewey places great weight on this faculty. It is imagination that allows us to detach from the immediate moment, project alternatives, and reshape our conduct before we enact it. Habit makes the world stable. Imagination makes it changeable. When fused, they give us the power to both stand firmly and evolve freely. Impulse as the catalyst of change. Where do these new possibilities come from? From impulse, those raw, untamed energies that dwell beneath the polished surface of habit. Impulse is life's unrest, the ancestral hunger that presses us toward the new. Dewey warns that impulse alone is chaotic, but when filtered through reflection, it becomes creative force. Habit is the channel. Impulse is the current. Thought is the engineer, who decides how the river will be shaped. To evolve, we must not suppress impulse, but educate it. We must let its energy flow through new designs. Thinking as deliberate reconstruction. Thinking then is not about abstract truth. It is about reconstructing experience, so that action may continue more intelligently. It is the pause between doing and doing again, a breathing space in which we gather the scattered pieces of life and arrange them into a more fitting pattern. Dewey calls this deliberation, the process of imagining various lines of action and tracing their likely consequences before committing to one. Deliberation is not hesitation. When thought becomes habit again. If thinking is born when habit breaks, what becomes of it afterward? Dewey answers, when a new pattern proves successful, it is absorbed back into habit. The insight becomes automatic. The once conscious choice becomes a new unconscious rhythm. This is the life cycle of conduct. Habit breakdown, thought reconstruction, new habit. Thus, intelligence is not separate from habit. It is the renovator of habit. And growth, Dewey says, is this cycle repeated endlessly through the seasons of a human life. The danger of thought detached from action. Yet Dewey warns of a subtle danger. Thinking can drift away from its purpose. We may become lost in endless reflection, hoarding possibilities, never returning to the living stream of action. When thought becomes detached from conduct, it turns sterile, like roots refusing to touch soil. True thought must be tested in the world. It must return to the body, to sensation, to choice. It must become life again. Thinking is not a luxury of the mind. It is the emergency power of life. When the known path dissolves, it rises from conflict, shapes raw impulse into vision, and hands us back our movement. Where habit sleeps, thought awakens, and where thought succeeds, new habits are born. This is how we evolve. not in stillness, but in the dance between fracture and renewal. Freedom, morality, and the shaping of character. We often speak of freedom as if it were a wild bird within us, an untamed force of pure will, ready to soar the moment rules are broken. But John Dewey whispers a subtler truth. Freedom is not born from the absence of constraint. It is born from the presence of understanding. Freedom is not the roar of impulse. It is the calm strength of a mind that has learned to guide itself. In Human Nature and Conduct, Dewey dismantles the myth that freedom means doing whatever we desire in the moment. Impulses, he says, are not enemies, but they are not sovereign either. To be free in the Deweyan sense is to shape impulses through reflective intelligence, not be possessed by them. Real freedom is not the release of energy, but its direction. It is the power to pause between desire and deed, to weigh consequences, to ask, does this action harmonize with the self I am trying to become? When we can do that, we are no longer driven by the wind of habit or passion. We are piloting our own vessel. Modern culture often equates freedom with spontaneity, as if the most authentic act is the one least filtered by thought. But spontaneity is not freedom. It is often just the automatic voice of old habits. The one who follows every whim is not free. They are ruled by the strongest impulse of the moment. True freedom is measured not by how quickly we act, but by how wisely we choose. Freedom requires the still courage to delay action long enough to see the wider pattern of its ripples. Here Dewey makes a profound move. He denies that morality comes from abstract commandments handed down from above. Instead, he says, morality emerges from experience. Ideals are not foreign stars. They are refined memories of what has worked well in life's flow, crystallized into visions of the better. They are the mind's way of holding up a mirror to its best moments and saying, more of this. We do not obey ideals like laws. We grow into them like trees into light. They are living possibilities, drawn from the soil of practice. Many moral systems frame ethics as punishment and reward. Follow the rule, avoid the lash, earn the prize. But Dewey rejects this machinery of fear. To him, morality is not a prison. It is a garden. Its purpose is not to control behavior, but to nourish growth. When morality becomes about punishment, it freezes conduct in fear. When it becomes about growth, it awakens conduct toward potential. Moral progress is not a march toward conformity. It is an unfolding toward greater wholeness. All of this converges in Dewey's notion of character. Character is not an essence we are born with. It is the slow weaving of our choices into identity. Each act, repeated and internalized, becomes part of the silent architecture of self. Over time, this architecture becomes the lens through which we meet the world. Character is not what we decide in a single moment. It is what decides for us in 1,000 moments. It is the rhythm of our habits, the tone of our emotions, the style of our perception, the gravitational field of our values. And just as it was built, it can be rebuilt. Every moral struggle, every choice to pause and reflect, etches new lines in the sculpture of character. Freedom as the power to rebuild the self. This is where Dewey's philosophy becomes electrifying. If character is made by conduct, and conduct is guided by habit, then freedom is the power to alter our own becoming. We are not condemned to repeat the old patterns. We can redesign them. This is not easy work. It asks us to stand between impulse and action, to tolerate uncertainty, to imagine new ways of living, and test them against reality. But this is what makes us truly human. We can step outside our own momentum and reshape its course. Freedom, then, is not the liberty to be whatever we feel, but the responsibility to become what we choose. We are not leaves blown by the wind of desire. We are gardeners of our own nature. Freedom is the art of tending that garden, training the wild energy of impulse, guiding it through the trellis of reflection, and letting it bloom into a character that embodies our deepest ideals. Morality is not a cage. It is the sunlight that calls the seed to grow. And character is not fate. It is the story of our conduct, rewritten each day by our choices. This is the power Dewey offers us, not the thrill of escape, but the quiet glory of self-creation. The social soul, environment, education, and growth. There is no isolated self. The image of a sealed, private ego, cut off from others, is a fiction. Every thought you think is formed from words you did not invent. Every value you hold was shaped in conversation, imitation, resistance, or reverence to someone else. Your mind is not a solitary spark. It is a living current flowing through the riverbed of culture. John Dewey understood this with startling clarity. In Human Nature and Conduct, he declares that character is the intersection of individual habit and social environment. We are not marble statues carved from within. We are vines climbing the latticework of our surroundings. And this truth carries both a warning and a promise. The moral power of environments. Environments are not neutral stages on which human life unfolds. They are active forces silently instructing us on how to see, feel, and act. A factory teaches repetition, speed, and hierarchy. A forest teaches patience, interdependence, and subtle attention. A marketplace teaches calculation, persuasion, and competition. Even the architecture of our cities molds conduct. Wide, open parks invite wandering conversation. Tight, crowded alleys breed haste and suspicion. Lighting, color, sound, rhythm, all of these are moral agents, not inert decor. Dewey warns that if we ignore the moral power of environments, we will blame individuals for what is really the fault of their surroundings. A child raised amid violence internalizes vigilance. A youth raised in neglect may wear indifference like armor. These are not moral failings but adaptive habits, proof of the mind's pliancy. So if we wish to cultivate noble conduct, we must build noble environments. We must treat every space, home, school, workplace, digital forum, as a silent teacher shaping the contours of character. The social origin of the self. Dewey challenges the illusion of the self as an isolated atom. What you call I is, in truth, a network of roles and relationships, a bundle of habits woven from countless interactions. Language is the clearest proof. We think in words that once belonged to others. We borrow gestures, tones, ideals, and even our dreams from the social air we breathe. Your sense of justice was formed in stories you heard. Your sense of beauty was shaped by songs, paintings, and rituals handed down across centuries. The self is therefore not a fortress but a membrane, porous and adaptive. This is not weakness. It is possibility. Because if the self is formed socially, it can be reformed through wiser, richer, more compassionate forms of association. Individual growth and social growth are not rivals. They are two aspects of the same current. To become fully yourself is not to withdraw from the world, but to engage with it more deeply and more intelligently. Education as the practice of liberation. Here lies Dewey's most radical vision. Education is not the transmission of knowledge but the cultivation of intelligent conduct. True education is not about memorizing facts or passing exams. It is about awakening the mind's power to see consequences, evaluate them, and act with foresight. In this sense, education is the very engine of moral freedom. But this demands a transformation of how we view schooling. Instead of treating students as vessels to be filled, we must see them as agents learning to guide their own growth. This requires environments that encourage curiosity, cooperation, and real problem-solving, not blind obedience. Dewey rejects authoritarian teaching because it breeds submission, not intelligence. He also rejects purely laissez-faire approaches that abandon children to unguided impulses. The middle way is guided freedom, giving learners meaningful tasks, real choices, and opportunities to reflect on the outcomes. Education should be life itself, not preparation for life. It should plunge students into authentic action, then help them examine their own conduct, reform their habits, and set new ideals born from experience. When education works this way, it does more than produce workers or citizens. It produces free beings, minds able to steer their own becoming. Ethics as continuous growth. Dewey denies that morality is a fixed code handed down from above. Instead, he portrays ethics as a living process of adaptation and growth. Ideals are not commandments etched in stone. They are working hypotheses, visions of better possibilities tested in the laboratory of life. When we pursue them, we do not march toward a final moral perfection. We participate in an endless evolution, refining our habits and widening our sympathies as our understanding deepens. This is a liberating thought. It means morality is not a cage of duty but a dance of becoming. Every mistake becomes material for growth. Every crisis becomes an invitation to enlarge the self. Every act of care becomes a rehearsal for a more compassionate world. Our responsibility, then, is not to conform to a static code but to keep the current of growth flowing, in ourselves, in others, and in the environments we co-create. The art of guiding conduct. What, finally, is conduct? It is not mere behavior nor mechanical reaction. For Dewey, conduct is the art of living intelligently. It is the patient weaving of habit, impulse, thought, and environment into a pattern that expresses who we aspire to be. It is how the self becomes real. To live well, then, is not to chase pleasure or obey duty but to consciously shape the forces that shape us. To choose our environments as carefully as our actions. To cultivate habits that serve ideals we have examined, not ones we have inherited blindly. To treat every choice as a brushstroke on the canvas of character. The future in Dewey's view is not waiting. It is being built right now, in classrooms, friendships, workplaces, public squares, and quiet private resolves. Each of us is an unfinished being, and the world is an unfinished home. The task is not to arrive at perfection but to keep growing toward greater intelligence, freedom, and care. Vedira closing reflection. In the end, human nature and conduct is not just a philosophy book. It is a manual for conscious becoming. It whispers that you are not a prisoner of your past, nor a victim of your impulses, nor a lonely soul adrift. You are a living intersection of forces, and you can guide them. Every habit you reshape, every thought you refine, every environment you improve becomes part of the unfolding masterpiece called your life. Growth is not something that happens to you. It is something you choose, cultivate, and become. And this is the promise. By learning to guide our conduct, we become artists of the human spirit, and together, we can craft a world worthy of our highest selves. Vedira.